Well, self-portraits were actually relatively uncommon in Britain in the period before Van Dyck. There are self-portraits, but there are only two painted self-portraits that we know of from the 16th century, oil paintings surviving, and even in the 17th century there aren't very many. Rembrandt, of course, comes to mind very obviously, painting himself almost at every stage of his life, kind of tracing the changes in his own face. And Van Dyck likewise painted a number of self-portraits throughout his career, but really he was the first artist working in Britain who'd done this. And so he, in a way, was introducing an idea of self-portraiture as a way of examining himself, which was really new for British artists. And of course, we don't know the circumstances under which most of his self-portraits were painted. Some of them may have been commissions from other people who simply wanted an image of him, perhaps to put in a gallery of famous artists. And again, that reflects the celebrity status, as it were, that Van Dyck had. But some of them may have been painted for his wife, for his family back in the Low Countries perhaps, or just for himself to celebrate particular moments of achievement in his career. There are about 7 known self-portraits by Van Dyck. There are 3 that have been identified as belonging to his period in Britain from 1632 until his death, and this seems to be the latest of the 3. We don't know the exact date, but judging by the style of the portrait and the appearance of the artist in it, we think it must date from the latest years of his time here. I think one of the first things you notice when you look at the painting is that the head is painted in a very different way from the body. The face and hair are painted with very fine, soft brushstrokes that aren't really very visible. It's quite a refined depiction of Van Dyck's head and very finished looking, whereas the costume is painted very broadly with quite a dry kind of paint, obvious brushstrokes very quickly applied in places, and that's a very different approach. We don't know why it's like that. It may be that the artist actually didn't finish the costume, or it may be that he just decided he would leave it like that. In a sense, it's an example of 2 different things he can do with equal success. I think the costume almost works as a kind of abstract part of the painting. The white lines of the slashes in his doublet on his back, on his chest and on his sleeve provide a sort of vortex of white circling round his shoulder with the huge and sort of rumpled white collar above it. In fact, interestingly, technical analysis that we've had done on the painting shows that he was wearing a slightly different costume originally, with a much smaller sticking up white collar and a doublet that seems to have had a kind of scalloped edge to it and was open at the front. What he's wearing is quite a formal kind of costume, and yet it's painted in this very vigorous and rather informal way. I always find when I come and stand in front of this painting that the sense of Van Dyck as an individual looking out from the canvas is very, very powerful. And I was struck when we were fundraising to buy the picture by the way that the public responded to it in that way as well. I think people walked past it when it was on our walls and stopped and stared at it and stood in front of it for much longer than they do with many of our paintings. And we know from things that people have said as well that people really felt a sense of a real person there behind the surface of the canvas, if you like. I think that's what a really great portrait painter can do, is create a sense of an individual who really lived and who really, in some strange way, is able to communicate something to us, even across many centuries. By acquiring this portrait for the National Portrait Gallery, we're not only ensuring the future of the painting in a context where it's going to be well looked after and seen by a huge number of people, we're also helping to complete the story that we tell about British life and culture. We can't really tell the story of 17th century Britain, and certainly Britain at the time of Charles I, without Van Dyck, who was such a key figure in shaping not just painting at the time, but the way in which we in posterity see the period. It's through Van Dyck's eyes that we imagine the courtiers, the soldiers, the royalists, and in some cases the parliamentarians who fought in the Civil War. The people we imagine when we think about that period in history are people shaped by Van Dyck.